and without price. There's no price that you can place on this water, this milk and honey. It doesn't have a price that we can pay. It's priceless. In Christ Chocolate Lessons, page 196, remember that Christ risked all. Christ Chocolate Lessons 196, remember that Christ risked all for our redemption. Heaven itself was imperiled. Heaven itself. At the foot of the cross, remembering that for one sinner, Christ would have laid down his life, you may estimate the value of a soul. God was willing to place all heaven at risk, imperiling it for the value of that soul, that one soul. And he wasn't, he did that. Sure, we can say, in his foreknowledge he saw many people saved. Yes, he might have seen that. But when it came to reality, that's not how it was with Christ. Because in his last hours on this earth, how many people did he have surrounding him, supporting him? How many? None. In his hours of, called the Passion of Christ, those last week of Christ, particularly in that Thursday night, he had that last supper with his disciples. He went out to the garden, soldiers came, and what happened to his disciples? Where were they when the pressure was on? Where were his disciples? They fled. And what had Jesus just been doing just before that? Praying. He'd been praying for them, and not only that, Sister White says, all up until that time, he was praying for his disciples. He had that beautiful, wonderful prayer in John chapter 17 for his disciples. That was on that night. But now in the Garden of Gethsemane, it's a different prayer. Now it's a prayer for who? For himself. And what prayer is he praying now? It's for himself, but what is that prayer?
Did you hear that cup?
He wanted the cup to pass from him. Signs of the Times, October 29, 1894, tells us that, you see, we know in Desire of Ages, at that time, the weight of the guilt of the whole world was starting to press itself upon his soul. It was pressing him in, bringing about a sense of depression upon him. As he went and prayed in that garden for that, his humanity, it says there in the Signs of the Times, October 29, 1894, his humanity shrank from the ordeal just as decidedly as yours and mine would shrink from it. He was a human being. He was about to be crucified. He knew it. Who here wants to die? No one wants to die. And particularly a cruel and ignominious death is what was in store for him. The mockings, the cruelty, the torture, the pain and the anguish of it all. There's no way you want to do that, go through with it. And he shrank from that, his humanity did. And hence he prayed his prayer. And how many times did he pray the prayer? Father, if it were possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt. And how many times did he pray that prayer?
3.
Yeah, it's a record, it's 3 times. Just as the Father struggled to give up his Son to our world. How many times did Jesus go in there to his Father? 3. How many times did Jesus then pray to his Father while on this earth for that cup to pass from him? 3. They struggled, both struggled to go through. And yet Jesus did what? At the end there, he surrendered himself to his Father's will. Not as I will, but as you will. There was no way, Jesus realized there was no way that the plan of salvation could be accomplished if he did not go through with this death. And he saw, at that hour, at that moment, he saw, it says in Isaiah 53, verse 11, he shall see of the travail of his soul and shall be satisfied. He did. There in that garden, he saw if he would overcome, if he would go through with this decision, if he would pay that price for sin, then how many would benefit from that act? How many? How many would? Multitude. Everybody would benefit from it, but how many would be redeemed, ultimately saved because of it? Well, we're told in the Scriptures a great multitude whom no man could number. And that is what gave him the courage and the hope to go through with it. And there on the cross, in those final hours, there was none who went with him there. But in those final hours, you know, the Father withdrew from him a sense of his presence. Up until that time, he had that sense. But that hour, he withdrew from him the sense of his presence. And Jesus felt for the first time in his existence, from all eternity, he felt what the sinner would feel in that final judgment when God would rise up to judge this earth. The separation that comes because of sin. Jesus felt that. And that was unbearable. So unbearable that it led him to cry out, what? What did he cry out? My God, why hast thou forsaken me? Had the Father forsaken him? No. We're told in Desire of Ages that the Father was there. He suffered with the Son. He was enshrouded in that blackness. You think about that, the Father actually came down to suffer with his Son. But the Son wasn't permitted to sense that presence. And there, we're told that he could not see, in volume 2 of the Testimonies it says that he could not see beyond the portals of the tomb. It's like he could not see a resurrection. All he could realise was that his Father was going to, because he had a price to pay, for sin, and he could not see beyond the portals of the tomb. And he was tempted to doubt his Father's love and care for him. But then his mind went back. In that hour of darkness, his mind went back to the only thing that his faith could grasp hold of. And what was that? 3 times in his life, in his ministry, the Father had said what? He said something to him that everybody heard. His disciples heard it. On his baptism, he said what? This is my beloved Son, in whom I'm well pleased. And he had that evidence that bore witness to his faith, that he was assured of right standing with his Father. His Father would not let him go. And he trusted in his Father's hand. And that's why he said, into thy hands, Father, into thy hands, I commend my spirit. And then he died. You know, Jesus makes that appeal, God makes the appeal to us today to count that cost. And if we know the gift of God, to ask of Him for that living water. It tells us here, Review and Herald, October 11, 1892. Jesus calls upon you to behold the confederacy of evil, to behold the conflicts with which you must meet. Taking up the cross and following Christ is not an easy thing to do. If they've done this to the master, what shall I do to the servants? That's what Jesus said. That's not an easy thing to do. He bids us count the cost of standing under the blood-stained banner. For he does not flatter us that we shall have no difficulties in this life. But although we have a confederacy of evil to meet, Jesus assures us that the whole army of heaven is enlisted to fight our battles for us, to work out for us a glorious victory. And Jesus is the captain of our salvation. Jesus gained the victory there at the cross for us. He offers to us that victory. And in the words of Paul, 2 Corinthians 9 verse 15, thanks be to God for His what? Unspeakable gift. May God bless us, brothers and sisters. May God bless us to appreciate that gift of God that He gave to us, and that we will accept that gift, receive that gift, and receiving the gift, we will receive that life that Jesus came to give us. Amen.